All right. I'll go ahead and start. We're still trying to work out some technical issues here. But my name's Edwin Dysinger, and I'm presenting on starting your first no-till garden. Are you not? Do you have a mic? No, I don't have a mic. Yeah, this is recording the presentation. So I don't naturally speak up very loud, so if I'm not speaking loud enough, just kind of give me signals and I'll try to lift my volume a little bit. I have some resources here that you're welcome to look at afterwards. There are 4 books written on no-till vegetable gardening, and I have 3 of them. So you can you can look at these afterwards. And then I've got this is if you're interested in the principles and the ideas behind no-till, why is no-till important, or what's the significance of it? I highly recommend this little book. It's called A Soil Owner's Manual, and it's written by a soil agronomist by the name of John Stika. He spent his career working up in the Dakotas. Stika. By the way, I do have a handout that I just sent to them right before we started. So it will be available to you afterwards. Sorry about that, but that's you will have a handout available. So this book is just it's very concise and to the point, and he does a really nice job in a very small space.
What's the name of it again?
A Soil Owner's Manual.
Okay, by who?
By John Jon Stika, Stika.
Thank you.
I'm going to just do a very, very brief review of the fundamentals of why we do no-till, because this course is intended to focus on the practicalities of how would you actually do it. My son on Wednesday did a class on soil building, and he covered this information there. If you weren't in that class, you can go back and listen to it. I'll just say one other thing. We're calling this no-till, and I feel like it's a misnomer. I'm not sure what it should be called, but no-till is not. It's not covering the whole idea. What we're talking about is a series of principles that explain, that if you follow these principles, you're working with the laws of nature, and the principles help you identify what those laws are and how you would want to work with them. Not tilling is just one of those principles. It's not the whole picture, but just for convenience, I'm speaking of no-till. But when I say no-till, I'm speaking of the big picture, not just specifically not tilling. So let's just say a prayer before we start. Father in heaven, we thank you that you have given us your word, written in the Bible, but also written in nature. And we pray that you would bless as we look at what you've written in nature and how we can work with that. Thank you for hearing us and for being with us now. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I've subtitled this, How Do You Take Out the Current Crop and Start a New Crop Without Tilling? Did any of you have that thought? Yeah. That's the, yeah.
Just a quick, if you don't mind, you have a lot of
I've got more, yeah, that's,
back up a little.
thank you, yeah. I'm grateful we've got more cord here. Okay. So there are a few more points to how to do no-till than just this question, but this is I'm going to primarily focus on that question today. So our story, my wife Jennifer here, and I, we both wanted to work overseas with poor and underserved people. So we got our master's degrees in public health, and we were both immediately hired by ADRA. And we spent the next 16 years working in Sudan, Tanzania, and Yemen, mostly with rural smallholder farmers. We came home to the U.S. in 2001, and then after 5 years, following the Lord's leading, we joined my brother John on the farm, and we became smallholder farmers ourselves. One of the things that really fascinated me, coming from a public health background to growing organic produce, was the connections that I saw immediately between human health and plant health. We come from the soil, and we have similar nutrient needs to the plants. And where do our nutrients come from? They come from plants, which get it from the soil. Yeah, and then we're Adventists. We know that there is a certain simple diet that has been shown to resolve many of our nutrition and lifestyle problems and diseases. So we have simple solutions to human nutrition and health. But I began to feel like we were missing something when it came to agriculture. It just did not seem that the solutions presenting to me for agriculture were as simple and direct as the ones we had for human health and nutrition. It seemed that they were complex and kind of focused on soil chemistry. They required soil tests for all 17 plant nutrients, and the tests could only be done in certain laboratories. They're not easily understandable by persons with little education. The soil tests were expensive, and the laboratories were not necessarily accessible. And the amendments needed are sometimes hard to track down, and they're also expensive. And and we're speaking of this from an American perspective, but my heart is still overseas. What's this? What kind of solution do I have to give to these people working in this field here? These kind of solutions that we were promoting here are just totally inaccessible to them. Absolutely, there's just no way they can do that. So I was just thinking that God's solutions are always very simple. They can be understood and implemented by a child. At the same time, they are very intricate and complex. And the greatest scientists still haven't figured them out. You know, their nutrition is incredibly complex. People don't know what happens when you eat basil and pasta. You know, how does that, you know, what happens when they mix in your gut? You know, all the interactions that take place. You know, all the herbs. You know, we say this plant has these nutrients, and this one has these ones. But when they get inside you, what kind of interactions are taking place? We don't know. But anyways, I think two examples of this are the gospel. You know, the gospel is just so simple, even a little child can understand it. But I don't think any of us is going to really understand it after we've studied all eternity. You know, we're not going to get to the bottom of it. And, the whole food plant-based nutrition is the same. It's a very, very simple concept that anyone can apply anywhere. And yet, you know, if you want to get to the bottom of it, we don't know what's going on. So I just kept telling myself that I think there must be something for agriculture that fits this pattern, for my sake and for the sake of African farmers and resource-poor smallholder farmers all over the world. So I think I found it. I'm not going to say certainly. I'm still learning this myself. But to me, what I'm going to share with you fits the pattern I'm talking about. In Genesis 1:29-30, God said, "Behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." What's the difference between what God gave man and what God gave the other creatures? Pardon? The part of the plant that's consumed. Okay. Now, one thing that just kind of puzzled me is God really talking about what's consumed? I'm not certain myself, but I just wondered. You know, I know that, you know, maybe things were different before the fall, but I know that now there are lots of birds and animals that consume seeds and fruits and things like that. And there are lots of people, myself included, that consume green leaves. So, you know, I just wasn't totally convinced that the distinction here is strictly about what's consumed. And as I thought about it, it just occurred to me, maybe God's saying something more, you know, that he actually has given mankind, seeds as a resource, you know, something that we can work with. You know, people like to try to figure out what's the difference. I'm talking about evolutionists especially. What's the difference between human beings and other animals, the rest of creation? This is one of the differences. There is no creature that manages seeds except for man, right? You know, we collect seeds, we store them, we plant them for a harvest. There are other creatures that store seeds. There are other creatures that sort of accidentally plant them, but not with the intention of getting a harvest that they would store again and plant. But our management goes beyond that. You know, we actually take seeds, we breed them, and we manage them in that way to get a certain outcome. So God has given us seeds to manage. And what we're learning is that seeds can be a tool for us to manage the earth even. It's not just for our health, for us to consume, but plants are a way that we can actually manage the earth. Gabe Brown, a couple of years ago, I went to a course, and he was one of the key presenters. He's a farmer up in North Dakota. He's got a bunch of stuff on YouTube. I highly recommend you listen to him. He's farming about 5,000 acres. These pictures are on his farm. He does all different kinds of crops and cattle. And notice he told us in the course that the only input he had provided on his farm for the last 7 years was what? Can you believe that? I was blown away when I heard that. I thought, really? But when he said that, my mind immediately clicked back to Genesis. I said, wait a minute, maybe there's something really here. That's my grandson, by the way. Yeah, this is our farm. So
what is that?
that's crimson clover. Yeah, it's so beautiful when it blooms.
Paul's son.
Yeah, Paul's son. Yeah. So the most potent tool with which to build healthy soil is a living plant. And that's from this book here. You get that? The most potent tool with which to build a healthy soil is a living plant. So how does this work? This is where I'm doing the quick review of what Paul went over on Wednesday. How plants build soil health and power the world. Photosynthesis in plants produces, among other things, carbon-rich carbohydrate root exudates. Okay? So the roots are exuding this carbon-rich exudate. There's this film right around the root, right next to the root. And that film is chock full of what? Bacteria and fungi, okay? It's just full of them. And so those root exudates feed the bacteria and fungi. In return, the bacteria and fungi supply the plants with nutrients. Okay? This is really important and significant. I always thought that plants somehow extracted nutrients directly from the soil. They don't. Plants get their nutrition via bacteria and fungi, not directly from the soil. In addition, those root exudates, the root exudates, fungal filaments, the hyphae, the fungi send out these long strands of hyphae, and blue-like secretions of many bacteria and other soil creatures help to form soil aggregates. This is a very important concept. I don't have time to go into it, but aggregates, you've heard people express concern about compaction in gardens. You don't walk in the beds, for example. That's compaction. That compaction is the opposite of aggregates. When you have good aggregates, you have a soil that has a crumb. We like to liken it to a chocolate, let's say a carob cake, okay? All right, so it should have a nice moist crumb. And Dwayne Lemon the other day was mentioning that the ideal soil has 40% mineral, 10% organic matter, or maybe, even 5%, could be 45% mineral. But anyways, the critical thing is that the other half, 25% and 25%, should be air and water. Okay, what that means is space. The soil should not be compacted. It needs space because the soil needs to breathe and it needs moisture. We've got all these microorganisms that are keeping our plants alive. They need to be kept alive. They need air and water. And so, but they help to form these aggregates, which helps to keep the soil in a good structure. If you have good aggregates, they help to prevent erosion. They help with infiltration of water. That means when you have good aggregates, water is sucked into the ground instead of running off of it. And so then that means you not only get more water in the soil, but you also have the soil retaining water longer. So, we're dealing with drought in a lot of places. These concepts are highly significant. If you have your soil with good aggregates in them, you are going to be much more drought resistant than your neighbor who doesn't have that. Very significantly more. You see anything there on the ground? And there's more over here. I was really happy to see those in our garden. That's a sign that, you want your soil to have a nice balance of bacteria and fungi. And it seems like the ideal is kind of like half and half. When soils are tilled frequently, they get overbalanced with bacteria, and you lose your microbes. One of the things that tilling does is, I mentioned those microbes send out hyphae. They send them out long distances, and those hyphae that they send out are like extensions to the root systems from your plants. Those hyphae communicate with other plants, and out far in the soil, and so they're if this plant here is needing selenium and doesn't have any, those hyphae are sourcing it way out there, and there may even be a plant that has extra and they'll source it from that plant. There's this communication going on underground that we're not aware of, and it's very, very amazing what happens. So there is no system of production or soil amendment that will fix what's wrong with your soil. Only your understanding of how the soil functions will fix what ails your soil. Okay? Do you see anything wrong with this soil here? It's dry. It's compacted. And what's this here? It's kind of a crust. That's a sign of a problem with the soil. It's, when you don't have the good aggregates, then you get that crust. You don't want a crust on your soil. So that's again from John Stika. So the 6 principles of soil health are minimal disturbance, armor or mulch. If that soil back in that other picture had something covering it, it would be so much happier. It would be so much happier. Diversity. You know, every plant has its own signature exudates that it sends out. So those exudates will attract a certain population of bacteria and fungi. Another plant variety will have its own signature with its own population of fungi and bacteria. But with them communicating with each other like that, the more variety you have and the more variety of plants you have, the greater variety of microbial life you'll have in your soil. And the greater variety of microbial life you have, the more ability the plants are going to have to communicate and source what they need, you know, through all these communication systems that they have. Living roots in the soil. You don't want your soil to go for extended periods of time without living roots. Why? Okay, yeah. What's everything? Yeah, the bacteria and the fungi. Yeah, they don't have their life source. They don't have their food source anymore, and so they'll die or go dormant. You know, they will come back again, but you've kind of set yourself back a bit. You know, it takes a while for them to reform and regroup and build their population back up again. So the more you can keep living roots in the soil, the more of a jump start you're going to have, you know, next season when you're ready to go again. Animals. You know, God created, it's another fascinating thing to me. In Genesis, if you read Genesis carefully, God really placed Adam over the animals. And by default over the rest of the creation. But there is some sort of a relationship that takes place, you know, between animals. The animals can do a lot of the work for us in the garden. You know, chickens, they'll do a lot of the scratching and tearing things up, but then their manure is good too. So anyways, there are significant benefits if you have land that you're growing on, if every once in a while you run animals on it and then take the animals off and then grow on it again. That kind of a pattern. And that again is a kind of a natural pattern that would take place in nature. But we can manage nature to make things even more productive than they are just in nature by itself. And finally, the last principle is context. What that means is that what's right in this situation is not necessarily right in this situation. You understand what I'm saying? You have to understand the context, what you're working with, and figure out what's good for your situation. So, our experience with no-till. Yes?
Number 2, the armor, what was that again?
Mulch.
Oh, mulch, okay, armor. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So we started experimenting with no-till, well, we're in our 3rd season now. So we started by sowing a winter cover crop of wheat and peas in all of the unplanted sections of our hoop house garden. This is a picture of part of it. I don't know if you can see clearly. I broadcast the wheat, and then I used a seeder to seed the peas. So there are 2 lines of peas, and then the wheat is just broadcast throughout.
Do you walk on the white or do you walk in the middle?
We walk on the white. Okay. The white are covers.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're They're just down. They don't need to be up right there, so we don't mind walking on them. So in March, I cut the cover crop down with a scythe and took it outside and composted it. I had some old hay bales, and so I mixed the fresh green with the brown of the hay bales and composted it together. And then I covered these beds with black tarps. I'm going to talk more about this and explain it more, but that is I was concerned that the rye, the wheat especially, might want to regrow. Grass, when you cut it, just keeps growing, doesn't it? So wheat is a grass. So I didn't want to just not do anything. So I covered it for 3 weeks so where it could not get any light. And then everything was dead after that. And then I took the cover crop that I had composted, I brought it back in and spread it as mulch on the beds.
So the roots are alive underneath, but it was the top stubble that was dying.
Yeah. And then we transplanted and in some cases direct seeded into the mulch. And I'll talk more about how to do that. So this is what it looked like after we had taken the cover crop off, and after we have just taken the black tarps off now also. And that's what it looked like before we put the mulch back on. Our second experience, we had a portion of a hayfield that we wanted to bring into production. It was about 1/3 of an acre. So we tilled it. And then we went to, we tilled it, and the next day or two after that, Paul and I went to this conference where we heard Gabe Brown talk about no-till. But as you'll find out, tilling actually might be your best way to start your garden. So don't rule it out completely.
So that's the first thing you do when you're starting up from scratch.
It's not necessarily the first thing to do, but I think almost every one of the authors in these books here, that's their favorite way to break new ground and start a no-till garden. It makes it a lot easier, and I'll give you some reasons why in a little bit here. So what we did is, after we had it tilled, we put a portion of it, about 1/3 of it, we put under black tarps. We seeded another portion of it with corn and beans and some sweet potatoes, and we seeded the third of it to a summer cover crop. The portion that had the summer cover crop had a lot of weed pressure. We have a real problem with Johnson grass, and I don't know if you Californians know what Johnson grass is, but it's just kind of imagine something like crabgrass on steroids. It'll grow this tall or taller, and it has these big runners that are up to 2 feet underground and running all over the place. And when you try to dig it out, I've seen just little tiny pieces like this that got left behind that sprouted a new plant. So they're not easy to work with. So that portion that had the cover crop, it was kind of half Johnson grass and half cover crop. I mowed it down twice. It grew up, I mowed it down, it grew up, I mowed it down, and then I covered it with tarps to kill it. And then after that, we seeded it with a winter cover crop. And I used the Haas Cedar to do that, and I'll explain more about that. So this is what the field looked like after we had tilled it. This, actually what happened, it wasn't good planning on our part, but we tilled the field, then we went to the conference, and then we came back and started working with it. We gave the field too long to get weeds going, so the weeds had a jump start on us. In the upper corner here, that's our summer cover crop with the Johnson grass. This is our corn here. And then this is that winter cover crop coming up, where I seeded it. I seeded actually through the mulch with the Haas Cedar, and I was really excited that it came up, because one of the things I had really puzzled over was, how am I going to seed into a mulch? Yeah. I'm just not convinced that I haven't tried broadcast seeding because I don't think it's going to work. But it might work, I don't know. But anyways, the Haas Cedar, you can see it did pretty well. This section here, the mulch was very thick, and so it didn't do quite as well. But where it was, a moderate thickness, it did well.
So the picture on that side is this field right here, later?
That area here is this area down here. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so that's in the summer, this is in the fall.
Okay.
Excuse me, did you put additional mulch, or is that just from the clipping?
That's from the mowing, yeah.
And then the cedar, does it it pokes it down?
I'll show you a picture of the cedar, yeah. That comes right at the end, but this is our cover crop coming up in early winter, and this is what it looked like in the spring. You can see it's a mix. It was a winter mix of about 7 or 8 different things, and I was really pleased.
Like what?
It had, I think we had 3 different grains. We had at least 3 different legumes. There's vetch, there's peas, and I think there's some crimson clover here, yeah. And then there were a number of brassicas. And the greater variety you can get in your cover crop mix. Remember, we were saying diversity is really important. So if you can get I've seen charts where they show the benefits that you get by adding different varieties. So the benefits climb steeply as you add 1, 2, 3. By the time you get to 5, you're kind of going over the curve a bit. And when you get to 7 or 8, it almost levels out. And so it's still gaining, but it's on a low trajectory after that. So if you can get 5 to 7 varieties, and you want to, don't make it 5 or 7 varieties of grains. Make sure you're mixing grains and legumes and brassicas and broadleaf things. So, yes.
I believe that we bought this as a cover crop that was already mixed.
We did, and yeah, there is a company that I highly recommend called Green Cover. Green Cover. They're in Nebraska, and you can. They specialize in cover crop seeds, and they have ready-made mixes, and you can also order a custom mix. They have all the individual varieties of cover crop potential that you could ever dream of, and you can mix and match how you want.
What was the name of it again?
Green Cover, yeah.
So So the seeds already come mixed, so you just
Yeah,
spread out.
yeah. So, yeah. So our third experience, we decided that we wanted to start a new garden up at our house on the hill. So these gardens are down near my son's house, and we're about half a mile away up on a hilltop. The soil, and I don't think I mentioned, we live in Tennessee, and our zone, our climate zone is 7A, just for your knowledge. So the soil on our hilltop is very, very hard and very, very rocky. And I mentioned that you might want to till, as your first thing you do to start a garden. I did not want to till up top there. It was just, I did not want to pull all those rocks up. And so we did another system. We decided to make beds with a heavy compost mulch. And so we put about 4 inches of compost per bed straight on top of the lawn. We did this in November. And then in the aisles between the compost, we filled it in with wood chips. On part of so we made 6 50-foot beds doing that, and for 2 of the beds, we laid cardboard down on the ground first, and then put the compost on top. That would probably be ideal, but we didn't have cardboard enough to do the whole area. So, yes.
When we decided that we wanted to put a garden up near the house there, that is totally different soil compared to where we were in the valley. The valley has very good soil, pretty much. But if we were going to do this and we had a lot of time, we would have tarped it first. And we did tarp it thinking we could kill them for a little bit, but winter seeds or weeds don't die from a tarping when they're already dormant. So you would need to plan ahead if you want to get the weeds out by keeping a tarp on it for a long time through a whole year cycle of getting the weeds. Does that make sense? Okay, so we knew we were going to be dealing with weeds, all right? But not as much as we realized when the spring came.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the spring, we seeded and transplanted straight into the mulch. We did have some moderate weed pressure from crabgrass. I think I spent 3 or 4 half days over several months, taking it out by hand, because that's the only way you could really do it. And I found that after trying several things, I found that my tool of choice was a crowbar, because I could dig down in the mulch and pry it out and find the runners. I don't like to break it off. If I find a runner, I like to follow it as far as I can underground and get it all out. So.
Did you see a difference between your beds that you had cardboard on and the others?
To be honest, I did not. There was a bit of a difference. There was not as much crabgrass down there as there were in the other beds. There were still a few perennial weeds. I'm going to talk about perennial. There's a difference between perennial weeds and annual weeds. So this is what it looked like. This is when we just dumped the compost. It's kind of expensive doing it this way. We bought that compost, and it would have been ideal if we had put 6 inches on each bed, but I just didn't feel like we could afford 6 inches. So we probably couldn't. We probably shouldn't have afforded 4 inches, but we did it. And So I'm using, I like to, we use quite a bit of drip tape, and I you know, after it gets old and holes in it and whatever, I like to use it as my guides for, so we marked out the beds with rebar. We have rebar in the corner of each bed, and then we use the drip tape to stretch out, and then we filled in with the compost.
And those are the Amazon cardboard.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you put between the beds? Is it mulch?
It's wood chips. Yeah.
Can you
So somebody asked what, I'm forgetting, I'm supposed to repeat the questions. Somebody asked what did we put between the beds, and it's wood chips.
Can you use sawdust?
You could. Yeah. Somebody asked, can we use sawdust? And you could, yes.
So what is that?
Pardon?
What is sawdust?
Sawdust, yeah. Well, sawdust would come from a sawmill where they're sawing lumber, so it's finer than the wood chips.
I was just going to mention that wood chips are amazing because I don't track in mud or dirt into the house. You know what I mean? They just keep your feet.
Yeah, my wife is saying that the wood chips are amazing because we don't track in mud or dirt. And it has been a joy to work in this garden. I will say that. I haven't minded working in it at all. So this is what it looked like in the spring. And notice we're experimenting with you know, planting several different crops together in the bed. In this bed here, we had carrots on the ground, and then we had leeks, 2 rows of leeks, and so we had 2 outside rows of carrots, 2 rows of leeks, just a little bit in from the carrots, and then down the center of the bed, we did all of our tomatoes and eggplants and peppers. And so the tomatoes, you can just, they're barely starting to come up. They're still kind of small there. So what time is it?
10:06.
And we have to 10:30, is that right? 10:15. Ah. Okay. So these are the basic steps for no-till. And I want to be clear that you may not every time do every one of these steps. You also may not do these steps in the order that I'm giving them. You might want to change the order for different reasons. But in most cases, you're going to be doing most of these steps, if not all of them, if you're doing a no-till garden. So usually the first step is going to be mowing. You just want to get the weed cover down as much as you can. There are several options for mowing. You can do a rotary mower. The one thing that I don't care so much about rotary mowers is that they tend to blow the stuff out. You know, and it tends to get windrowed. You know, it's lighter in some places and heavier in other places. But you know, if that's all you've got, then that's fine. A flail mower, you're probably not going to have a flail mower unless you're a farmer. They're somewhat expensive, but they are very nice. This is looking on the underside of a flail mower. It has these things here that are on kind of a chain link, and so this rotates, and these are flails, and so they're spinning, and so they chop up everything into small pieces. It's even-sized pieces, and it's all spread evenly on your ground. So if you are a farmer, that's a really nice thing to have. I like scything. I don't have an affinity for gasoline engines. I like quiet things. And so scything is nice. But the other thing is a weed eater is not going to probably do the job that you want for cutting down a cover crop, because it's going to throw stuff everywhere. And you want all of that stuff contained on your bed where you were growing it, usually. And even if you don't want it all there, you still want to collect it so that you can compost it. I mean, you just don't want to waste it to the wind like a weed eater will do. So I didn't even put a weed eater down because in my mind it's not a good option. And then you can also cut by hand. That's what Jennifer's actually doing here. This is some cover crop that we seeded among our other crops, because we had a rain event that washed out a bunch of these beds after we'd started planting into them, and I decided to plant cover crop in to anchor the beds in place so that wouldn't happen again. So that was kind of an unintended thing that we did, but it actually didn't work out that bad, and I'm thinking of doing more experiments along those lines. So terminating, how are you going to terminate the crop? That's the termination is the next step. And that's probably the biggest question about no-till. When you're going to terminate a crop, and when I say a crop, that could be weeds, that could be sod, it could, anything that's growing that you want to get rid of and replace with your garden. You need to know what you're dealing with, because different plants have different characteristics, and so you'll need different strategies to deal with them. Annuals are almost always easier to deal with than perennials, and because they tend to be softer, perennials tend to be woodier, okay? And so most of the strategies we have for dealing with, for terminating a crop are in a no-till way. Most of the strategies we have work very well on annuals. They don't work very well on perennials, especially tap-rooted and underground running ones. Those can be very difficult to get rid of. So one way, probably the best way to get rid of the tap roots and underground running things would be frequent, very low mowing or tillage. There is one other way that I'll mention, so actual termination strategies. One is herbicide. I don't recommend chemical herbicide. You can do it if you want, but there are organic herbicides, and you can if you look online, you can find recipes to make them yourself. Most of them are based on vinegar, and but these organic herbicides in particular tend to work well on the small fresh plants. They don't work well on older and woodier plants. Flame weighting is basically the same thing. It works well on the small tender plants. It is not going to work well on the older woody ones. Winter kill is a strategy. There are certain plants that are killed by frost, and so you can plan to grow a cover crop that would be killed by frost, and then you could let it sit dead as a mulch over the winter. That's one thing that some farmers do. If you do that, you do need to keep in mind that you may have weeds there that are not killed by the frost, and that may be something that you'll need to deal with. The roller crimpers are the way most big farmers who are doing no-till, that's the way they go. And it's very nifty. This thing, you see it's in the front of the tractor, it's attached to the bucket, and it's knocking the cover crop down and crimping it. These things here put crimps in it, and it kills the cover crop. And then what he's got behind here is a no-till seed drill. And so he's actually, in one pass, he's knocking down the cover crop and seeding his follow-on crop behind it. So it's a very efficient and nifty way to do things. Most of us on a home garden scale aren't going to be able to do this.
What is that called?
It's called, on the back, it's a no-till seed drill. Yeah. Another way is to mow at the flowering stage. Most plants, they have a growth stage, and then when they begin to flower, they are maturing. And the technical word is senescence. They're entering into senescence. And yeah, it's maturity. And at that time, they're putting most of their energy into reproduction and not into growth, and so they are more fragile, and so it is easier to kill them by mowing them at that stage, at the flowering stage. You don't want to let the flowering go to seeding, so you have to watch your window there closely. 1 year seeding is 7 years weeding. That's an old farmer's too. So this is a termination method. So these termination methods that I've just mentioned, I'm telling them to you, but I don't think they're that practical, to be honest. This is one that I have not used, but I think it has potential. So what you're doing is you're using clear plastic to generate heat. And you want to be cautious in doing this because it will generate very high heat, and it can actually sterilize your soil. And why are we doing no-till? We're wanting to preserve the biology of the soil, right? So we don't want to sterilize it. But there are farmers, this guy in particular, this is his method of choice for terminating crops. He does it for 1 or 2 days, he says. I don't know, I said 1 day or less. I think it should be 1 or 2 days. And he says it has to be done when the temperatures are at 75 degrees or higher, and it will only work, he lives in Connecticut, and for him it only works between May and September. So in other words, you have to have long enough days with the sun directly above enough and hot enough for it actually to get hot enough to kill the plants. You can use old hoop house plastic, the 6 millimeter plastic. One thing to keep in mind is if you're using old plastic, if you're like us, the plastic is guaranteed for 4 years, and we try to get 6 if we can. But by that time, it's usually starting to disintegrate on its own, and so it might, if your plastic has reached that stage, it might not be the ideal plastic to use for this. But you can also buy contractor plastic, 4 mil plastic. I just checked, and you can get a 12 by 100 from Lowe's for $65.
So you're using clear plastic, not
clear. Yeah, this is clear plastic. There's another. The next method is using black. This is using clear. So this is using heat to kill the plants. So the pros and cons, it's fast. It's very fast, and that's very nice because a lot of these other methods take time. But it may not completely kill the weeds. Although Brian O'Hara, this guy, really likes it and says it works well. I was reading some researchers in New Hampshire that did a comparison of black tarps and clear plastic, and they said that the tarps were clearly superior. But they did allow that they may not have done some things right with the clear plastic. You know, there are so many variables, you might not have gotten something right. So I don't know. But I do think it's something, as I said, I have not done it, but I think it's worth experimenting with, looking at. So what I do have experience with is what we call occultation. That's not dabbling in the occult, but the word means dark, so you understand where it's coming from. And so we're blocking the light so the plants can't grow. So we're using this system. It's not the heat that's killing them, it's the absence of light. So what we use generally for this purpose are silage tarps. They're black on one side, white on the other. You can also use landscape fabric. The downside of landscape fabric is that it's, comes in narrow rolls. If you have a large space, that might not work well. But if you're doing individual beds, the landscape fabric might work well. I mean, it can work well. But you're not limited to these things. Cardboard and newspaper and mulch and compost are doing the same thing. So generally, if you're using cardboard or newspaper, you'll want to put mulch and or compost on top of it, to hold it down. But so the pros and cons of occultation is that it will kill the weeds. It can be used to kill perennial weeds. It can. I've done it. But for most annuals, you'll need to have it on for 2 or 3 weeks. To me, that's a downside. You're tying up a lot of gardening time in this process. To deal with the perennials, I killed Johnson grass by keeping tarps on for 3 months in the summer. That, keeping them on in the winter doesn't count because the stuff is dormant anyways. So you can do it, but it's a big commitment of time. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing the tarping is that you're killing the weeds of the current season, not the next season. So if you have tarps on for a certain season and you take them off coming into the next season because you're wanting to grow, you may not have the advantage that you thought you were going to have. I've experienced that a time or two. So finally, our time's up. We're talking about tillage. I've already mentioned that, so I think I'll just leave it. Another thing that you need to do is manage your residue. You can leave it in place, you can take it off and compost it, like I said. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're going to direct seed, you'll need to clear your debris off. We try to transplant as much as we can, and we only direct seed very few things. And we were able to do that using this system. You may want to add amendments. It's not necessary, but if you're able to, I would encourage you to add rock powders or other things if you can. I put that anthill in there. In Africa, they actually encourage, if they don't have anything else that they can add, get dirt from an anthill because it's rich in minerals that's been mined up from underneath. You can transplant direct in, but you need to keep, there's a trick when you're doing no-till and you're transplanting. With no-till, we don't ever pull out plants by their roots, okay? Because we want those roots in the ground. Even if we're cutting the plant off, we want the roots there because the roots have all that microbiology on them, and that can be available to new plants that are growing. So, but that means you've got stumps in your ground, okay? So when you're following a crop with another crop, you want to think of something that has spacing that is going to fit around what your previous crop had. You don't want to be planting on top of those stumps. Does that make sense? If you had something with 3 rows in a bed, you might want to put in something that has 2 rows, so that you're not going where those other rows were, or you can figure out what to do. But that's just something to keep in mind when you're transplanting. With direct seeding, I'm just going to show you the cedars here. This is the Haas cedar, and this is a very common cedar, the earthway cedar. But what makes the Haas cedar work well are these 2 things here. The seeds fall, there's a tube that comes down right between these 2 discs, and these discs rotate. And so when you're going over residue, crop residue that's on the ground, these 2 things, they don't actually cut it, but they'll ride up over it and press it down. The main thing is, because they turn, they don't collect anything in front of them. This one here has this kind of a shovel thing. As you're pushing that through residue, you're going to start collecting residue in front of you, and it's going to be unmanageable. So there are other cedars besides the Haas that have these kinds of things. So if you think that you might be wanting to direct seed into ground that has residue, look for a cedar that has 2 discs like that are rotating. I think that's it.
Which crops do you direct seed?
We direct seed most beans, carrots, beets we will sometimes transplant and sometimes direct seed. Radishes will direct seed. And if you want to, like any kind of baby greens that you want to sow thickly, you'll direct seed those. But otherwise, I don't think there's anything else that we direct seed.